Beartooth's The Surface is Smilecore at its absolute finest. Introduction. What is Smilecore? Before we get going on the review, I want to take a second to explain what I mean by the usage of the word Smilecore in the title. As it turns out, Smilecore is an actual aesthetic based around happiness and positivity, traditionally associated with a smiling yellow face. This is something that I actually had no clue about, though it still makes sense to me. With that being said, my usage of Smilecore comes down to core music, such as metalcore or deathcore, but usually metalcore in this instance, featuring somewhat heavy guitar work, unclean cleans and breakdowns alongside melodic and especially catchy choruses and verses too, with a positive and typically happier vibe, not to mention much less pessimistic lyrical content on top of it. Much of what I and my friends playfully call Smilecore is the work by Christian metalcore bands for their focus on more hopeful and spiritual aspects in their work. More generally, however, I'd say that Smilecore in this instance can be simply summed up as metalcore that makes one smile or makes one happy not just because they love it, but because they can't not. Of course, this is a completely arbitrary quote-unquote definition, I know, but I think it works for the purposes of this review, for both the reason of the tone of this work being quite less emotionally heavy than the band's past work has traditionally been, and also because I and a couple of my friends love the message behind it. Now to the context. Caleb Shomo, the frontman of Beartooth, has been quite vocal about his struggles with depression and alcoholism over his life. It has been noted that Shomo's departure from the band Attack Attack was largely influenced by this depression and anxiety, especially because of his being so young at the time. Over the years since then, and since founding Beartooth, Shomo's lyrics have very often focused and revolved around these issues. A particular song of note comes from the band's debut record, Disgusting, from 2014, a track titled I Have a Problem, though this thematic trend is absolutely not relegated to just this song. In a recent new era of Shomo's life, however, he has become sober and grown to be quite happy, particularly in comparison, and The Surface is a testament to this journey over the last few years. I use Smilecore to describe this album specifically because of the very conscious decision on Shomo's part to make that the vibe of the album, to reflect the changes made in his life. As the singles were coming out, I fell in love with each of them, and if I was ever feeling down, whether by a major anxiety in my life or just a random mood, turning on these tracks could immediately pick me back up, often forgetting entirely why I was upset beforehand. To me, The Surface is the quintessential Smilecore record and may come to define a small movement within metalcore itself of bands chasing after a happier vibe for happier people. Though I doubt many other bands could pull it off so well or so genuinely as Beartooth has here, it is still a testament to the power of changing one's lifestyle. In this review, I intend to look at this album more deeply and try my best to explain just why I adore it so much, why I think The Surface will remain in my permanent rotation, and might just be my album of the year, even over Sleep Token and Polaris, because I myself have recently been in a much better place in life. Happier, more productive, less hopeless, generally just a better version of myself than I was a couple of years ago, and so relate to the messages found in the record much more deeply than I think I could have prior. Beartooth's The Surface is Smilecore at its absolute finest. Part 1. Disease and Riptide. To add some important context to this review, I must talk briefly about my relationship to Beartooth's back catalog. I first became familiar with the band in September 2018 around the release of the album Disease. To this day, the album remains very special to me, containing several of my all-time favorite songs that have always meant a lot to me, most especially Clever, After All, Believe, Disease, and You Never Know, though the first two of those examples are the biggest for me. The time of this record was especially bad for Caleb Shomo in his mental health and alcoholism, so far as I am aware, and Disease was an album that continued to be very important to me for a few years afterwards. I found it deeply relatable and was one of the key pieces of what kept me going in my late teens when I was still deeply depressed, suffering from bipolar in high school. There were scarcely times between 2018 and 2020, 2 years later, that I couldn't go to it in an instant. But in 2020, after my graduation from high school, my own mental health improved dramatically. School was a major factor in what had me so down and or in chaotic headspaces for so long. And so being out of there was a big part of what helped me get better. As such, I stopped returning to disease as much, largely because I didn't feel like I needed to anymore. That incredibly dark and depressing feeling wasn't exactly me. This is also a significant reason why I forgot about the band's 2021 album Below. Although I do think it is musically on par with Disease in that I really enjoy listening to it, I obviously never developed such a connection to it as a whole. Here we fast forward to the release of Riptide as a single on July 11th, 2022. My comment on the music video, which I rediscovered while writing this review, reads, "Holy fuck, the vibe of this album is so different lyrically. I'm digging it hardcore. That chorus is hereby the anthem of 2022." That comment ended up aging incredibly well. I listened to Riptide more than 50 times in 2022. I typically don't play songs on repeat, and especially tend not to listen to singles that I suspect will be pre-album singles too extensively, so this was a huge change in my typical habits. The song currently ranks number 5 in my all-time stream tracks on Spotify, and actually, as I'm recording this, I remember that jumped up to number 4. Riptide was in fact a very important song for me in 2022. As I was in a slightly more mentally unstable mood that summer compared to the year prior, this song did a lot to keep me up. It's the last time that I romanticized the riptide that's trying to drown me, was a hugely encouraging line within a perfect chorus that remains an anthemic slogan for me to this day. As a final side note, it also has one of the few live music video versions I actively enjoy and return to. Part 2. The remaining singles. In mid-April of 2023, Sunshine released. Initially, the song seemed a little strange to me, but it only took a few listens for it to click and become an equal part of the near-daily rotation alongside Riptide. Although there are still aspects to the song that don't make the most sense to me generally, the chorus to this nearly takes over Riptide in terms of catchiness. It's such a bop, a theme for nearly everything on the surface. With that being said, at this point in time, I wasn't 100% sure there'd be an album. I thought that maybe Beartooth would just be doing a bunch of these Smilecore singles in succession, but whatever the decision, I was totally behind what seemed to be the new direction. Overly catchy, overly melodic, and generally such a fun time that I couldn't ignore it. But then in late July of 2023, Might Love Myself dropped alongside an album announcement. Now typically, I max myself at 3 singles for any given album, sometimes as few as 1 or 2. But as I think I've made it quite clear, I adored the first 2 singles. I figured I was committing a crime against myself for skipping this one, so I listened to it. And again, I was caught off guard for the first listen or two, as up to this point all 3 singles sounded simultaneously very different, yet the exact same. Might Love Myself became an immediate favorite afterwards, though, quicker than Sunshine did, at least. Yet another track with an amazing chorus, great optimistic lyrics, a satisfying breakdown that contrasts but also enhances the rest of the song. Beartooth's single selection for this album was on point. With a slightly increased frequency, 2 more singles came out in late August and mid-September 2023, titled Doubt Me and The Better Me, respectively. Now, remember when I said I don't listen to more than 3 singles for an album? I listened to all 5 of these singles, and I listened to them all so much I almost feel like a different person. This was a similar experience I had to the 3 Polaris singles this year, Inhumane, Nightmare, and Overflow. Whether I restrict the number of singles I listen to or not, I always limit the amount that I listen to them. These 2 albums have seen a totally different habit out of me. It's insane. Anyway, Doubt Me came out as the token heavy song and single for The Surface. But that doesn't make it bad, though maybe the version of me that had only listened to it once would say as much. I didn't dislike it so much as I found certain aspects to it lacking, until I listened to it a second time and realized that I was smoking crack and the song is actually amazing. I have a few friends who consider it a favorite on the album, and I completely see why. Shortly thereafter, however, The Better Me came out, and although I thought it was a little strange at first, a common theme clearly for all of these singles, it did not take long for me to click with it. The most solid proof for this fact is that merely 2 weeks after the single's release, I listened to it nearly twice as many times as the other singles. It is potentially the most catchy Beartooth song to exist, with one of my all-time favorite choruses, both melodically and lyrically. It has been my newest anthem beyond the other singles, and never failing to bring a smile to my face is likely to remain as such for a long time. Part 3, The Surface. Finally, in mid-October, The Surface as an entire record dropped. I think I can confidently say that this was my most anticipated release of the year. The only one that maybe came close to that was Polaris's Fatalism, which I also reviewed not too long ago on this very channel. Some of my other favorite albums so far in 2023, such as Take Me Back to Eden by Sleep Token, weren't on my radar beforehand. The main question I had to ask myself upon first listen was simply, does the full body of work hold up the way the singles do? To answer this question, I will primarily dig into two different sides of it: the individual deep cuts in context with the singles that came before, and the way the full album comes together in the end. Let's consider the former portion of this, as the much longer portion, first. The album opens with the title track The Surface, an absolute banger that perfectly sets the tone for the record as a whole. Lyrically, it sets forth the idea, with a catchy melody to boot: all my worries were a waste of time, made the world so blurry I was going blind, signifying the need to leave behind the baggage that no longer serves the soul. This is an idea obviously explored quite thoroughly in different manners through the singles already discussed up to this point. Riptide says, "It's the last time that I romanticize the riptide that's trying to drown me." The Better Me says, "Today's the day I stop fucking around and be the better me." Might Love Myself says, "Chemistry is changing, emotions rearranging, I'm out of my cage, breaking my spell, I think I might love myself." And Sunshine says, "I finally admit it, I gotta be committed to let this story unfold." Obviously, Caleb's outlook has changed, and with more lyrics from The Surface, we see the motivation for it being the opener as well. I think that I just discovered a way to let you see under the surface now, to signify his opening up to the change and letting everybody else see it too. It's really a brilliant opener, matching perfectly with the messages set forth by the singles. It's furthermore a better opener than Greatness or Death was on Disease. Side note, I should mention that because Disease is my primary reference point for the band because of how big of an impact the record had on me, basically all comparisons I draw in this review will be directly to it. The next 5 songs of the track list are the singles, so from this point, all of the new songs are tacked on the end. What's Killing You is a certified banger of a track that a couple of my friends immediately loved. One of them, I believe, says it's one of his favorites on the record alongside Doubt Me, the heaviest single. I have a mildly strange relationship with the track due to a couple interesting sonic decisions in the first chorus, and also thinking it was a bit long, but that was only the first couple listens. Just like nearly all of the singles that came before this release, it was only a matter of a handful of rotations to sell it to me, which can be said word for the remainder of these songs, by the way, so I won't continue to rehash it here. Look the Other Way is the notable standout on The Surface as a result of being much softer, not quite acoustic, but could be easily converted into as much. The song seems to tonally and lyrically set a little bit of a different mood than the rest do, and so also seems like an unexpected addition to the album as a result. But with that being said, though, on further reflection, it also makes perfect sense, even if the placement still feels a tiny bit off to me. The song is about a man who's slowly going off the rails and knows that he's losing that control, much like Caleb must have felt in his life. It takes this idea and melds it briefly with a motif from Riptide saying, "I'm barely surviving, but I need you to know I'm picking up the pieces. Please just look the other way." An ever so slight evolution of the "it's overwhelming, not ever telling the ones I love that I gotta find help." Beautiful messaging that finally ends in a sort of ode to, I'm assuming, Caleb's wife with the lines, "You said you'll always be right here to keep me company," When I don't even love myself, you love me anyway. In a stark musical contrast to Look the Other Way, What Are You Waiting For is more like an anthem dedicated to everybody who's still stuck somewhere in their life, whether that be depression, alcoholism, apathy, whatever. The chorus sings, "Burn it to the ground, turn your life around, no better time than now to ask yourself, what are you waiting for?" I think I saw some comments on the band's various posts about the record saying it was single-handedly motivating some people out of depression, and I could 100% see What Are You Waiting For being a big reason why. There's truthfully too much to say about My New Reality, as I could rip nearly every lyric from the song and give it meaning, so I'll try to restrain myself a little bit. The main idea of it boils down to the last line of each chorus and ultimate refrain at the end of the track: "I think my wildest dream is my new reality." In the case of most rock stars singing a line like this, it would typically be meant, and so interpreted, as the acknowledgement that a musician's dream to make it big became real life. But to me, this reads as much more personal for Caleb. He's always been on top of the scene since he was back in Attack Attack. Beartooth has seen plenty of success for a long while, too. Instead, I think this line is talking about the happy version of Caleb. His wildest dream was to be happy and comfortable in his skin, to no longer be a slave to alcohol and depression. Furthermore, the song also makes reference to Might Love Myself with the lyric, "Dealt with my emotions, future's been refocused," directly commenting on the chemistry is changing, emotions rearranging lines I mentioned earlier. These last two songs see the true shift from "I need to change" to "I'm better now," and I love to see it. The verses and the chorus to this one are strangely addicting, super great melody choices, and the breakdown rivals the best on the record, even if the pre-breakdown callout is not the best. The last song, I Was Alive, is something truly special. Before listening to The Surface in full on release day, I recall seeing on Caleb's Instagram a short video that he made in anticipation for the album drop, and, more specifically, the release of the music video for this final song. He said something about this being his favorite song he's ever written. When I listened to the record, however, I will admit I was at first underwhelmed by I Was Alive. But again, just as always, a few more listens, and it finally clicked. This may now be my favorite song on The Surface, barring The Better Me and Riptide. It is truly something special. It's not the most complex, nor the most intricate, but the lyrics of it are so freaking good. No need to fear the end, 'cause I'll know I didn't just live, I was alive. One of the best lines in the entire record, and that doesn't even mention the self-reflective concept used for the verses that works so well too. At its core, I Was Alive is about avoiding regret at the end of one's life. Not going to be on my deathbed wondering why I was always scared to say the things I never said to the ones I loved while I was there. In the second verse, and not going to be on my deathbed knowing I'll be buried in regret, thinking about the things I never did while I'm taking my last breath in the first verse. It's just so good. Incredible meaning. This song went from me at first wondering, this is really Caleb's favorite song, to, wow, this is one of my favorite songs, in just a couple days. Many of the non-singles followed a similar trend of enjoyment as the singles for me as I continued to listen, which has been fine with me because over half of these songs are all-time favorites now. But I think I've talked about the songs themselves for long enough. More than long enough, in fact. This post is over 1,000 words longer than either of my last two album reviews were, so let me try to wrap up the second part of this analysis without lollygagging too much. As a whole, The Surface really stands on its own in all the best ways, because it's not just an album to listen to in full sometimes, as is my typical habit. It's also got tons of incredibly solid tracks on their own that I can go between whenever I feel like as well. I feel it's an incredibly versatile body of work that makes for an easy go-to, especially when so many of these songs are so exciting and positive as they are. It's incredible. On the topic of full length, I will also add that despite my tending to dislike when albums are sub 40 minutes, I love the 37-minute runtime on this one, so that if I want, I can fit it into many occasions more than my generally preferred 45 to 75-minute albums, depending on genre and artist. If I skip a couple tracks as well, which I also normally feel bad about but don't here because of how standalone these songs all are, it's basically just a half-hour album, and that's even easier to fit into random time slots. Not to mention the ability to just pick a handful of my favorites at any given moment and just dedicatedly use those for 10 to 15 minutes. I think my favorite songs on the surface are Riptide and The Better Me, where the singles are concerned, and then The Surface and I Was Alive for the non singles. Although, to be clear, I Was Alive is a single, but it was an album release single, so I treat it differently. On the other hand, it's actually hard to pick a least favorite song on the album at this point, but I think What Are You Waiting For and Look the Other Way might appear in the constant rotation the least over time. Not to say either song is bad, obviously, as I've just praised them, but I think they connect with me the least in my current state of life. I imagine they would be favorites for many other people, though, and I love that. Conclusion. Album of the Year contention. So, that was a lot longer than I thought it would end up being. But I think that's okay. Basically, all of this review felt more natural to write than either of my last two did, so I'm not too miffed about this. Hell, it might have even been more natural than writing my Take Me Back to Eden review, and up to this point, that's my favorite album review on the channel. I genuinely love this album. As I said earlier, Disease was the relatable downer that I needed to relate to back in 2018 and 2019, and to this day remains a favorite of mine, with several all-time favorite songs, but the change of tone and lyrical sensibilities to the surface is genuinely the thing that I need at this point in my life, and I love it so much. At this point in time, I think it stands up there in my top 3 records of 2023 so far with Periphery 5 and Take Me Back to Eden. For the record, Fatalism is probably still top 5, but these others are probably top 3. Who knows, I may see this album reach number 1 just for how often I've already played all the singles, combined with the dozen or more times I've already listened to the album in the past week and a half. I have an addiction, and I'm not ashamed to admit it where Beartooth's flavor of Smilecore is concerned. I expect this addiction to last me a very long time indeed.